Time to pull up a chair. We've got another great story for you today in the rLounge. Ever wondered what happens when a stepmom spends years treating her stepkid like a tenant in their own house, only to realize the kid is actually the landlord, the bank, and the final boss? Today in the rLounge, one very calm 18-year-old collects years of frustration and serves it back with interest. Stepmom demands I started paying rent now that I'm 18. Little did she know the house is mine, so I evicted her. My 18th birthday came and went without much fanfare. Woke up to a few texts from friends, scrolled through social media for a bit, then headed downstairs. My stepmom was already in the kitchen doing her usual morning routine. She didn't acknowledge me at all, which honestly wasn't surprising. Since my dad died 2 years ago, she'd made it pretty clear I was just an inconvenience she had to tolerate. She'd married my dad when I was 14. 4 years total they were together before cancer took him when I was 16. Those last 2 years of living alone with her have been absolute hell. She wasn't abusive or anything dramatic like that, just cold and dismissive. Made me feel like a guest at my own home, always commenting on my stuff being in the way or my friends being too loud. The kind of person who makes you want to spend as little time at home as possible. That evening, after dinner, she cornered me in the hallway with this expression on her face that I can only describe as satisfied. She told me we needed to have a serious conversation about my future. I figured it was going to be some lecture about college or getting out more. But what came out of her mouth actually shocked me. Now that I was 18 and legally an adult, she said, it was time I started contributing to the household. Rent would be $800 a month, due on the 1st of next month. She had this whole speech prepared about responsibility and the real world, and how she was doing me a favor by charging less than marketed rate. I just stood there and let her talk. Inside I was fighting the urge to laugh in her face, but I kept my expression neutral. She had no idea what she'd just walked into. See, what she didn't know was that my dad had left everything to me. The house, his investment accounts, all of it. Everything was in a trust that I couldn't access until my 18th birthday, which had literally just passed. My uncle had been the trustee for the past 2 years, handling everything quietly. He'd been the one to deal with bills and property taxes and all that administrative stuff while I was still a minor. We'd had conversations about what would happen when I turned 18, but I'd kept it all to myself. My stepmom had no clue. So when she finished her speech about rent and rules and expectations, I just nodded and asked her when she wanted the money. Her smile got wider and said the first would be perfect. I told her I'd make sure to have something for her by then and went back to my room. The next morning I headed over to my uncle's office. He had all the paperwork ready for me to sign. The house is mine, paid off completely, worth about $450,000 according to the latest assessment. There were investment accounts too, enough that I wouldn't need to worry about money for a good while if I was smart about it. My uncle walked me through everything my dad had set up. Apparently, he'd done all of this shortly after marrying her. He'd had a prenup, and the trust was specifically structured so she'd get nothing when he died except the right to live in the house until I turned 18. That deadline had just expired. I asked my uncle if he knew why my dad had been so careful about all this. He told me my dad had confided in him that he had concerns about her motivations for the marriage, that she seemed more interested in security than in him. Reading between the lines, my dad had known exactly what he was dealing with and had protected me accordingly. That's when I asked if I could access my dad's old email account. Everything was technically mine now, including his digital accounts. My uncle helped me get into it, and I spent the next few hours reading through messages I probably shouldn't have been reading. The emails between her and various attorneys were something else. She was furious, calling my dad manipulative and cruel for leaving her nothing. One email described how she'd wasted 4 years on him. Another complained about having to wait until I turned 18 to even contest anything. She'd been planning this whole time to try and take what my dad had left me. There were other emails too, from before my dad got sick. Messages to her sister complaining about me, about my dad, and the house not being in her name. She'd been unhappy from the start, but stayed anyway. Over the next few days, she kept bringing up the rent situation. She'd apparently spent time thinking about the rules for me as her tenant. I needed help with groceries now. Utilities would be split down the middle. I had a curfew of midnight on weekends, 10 p.m. on weeknights. At 18 years old, she was trying to give me a curfew. Every time she'd list off another rule, I'd just nod and agree. I asked clarifying questions, acted like I was taking it seriously. The whole time I was thinking about what was coming on the 1st of the month. She thought she'd finally won something, finally had control over me. I let her believe it. I went back to my uncle's office about a week after my birthday. We started the eviction process. Since her legal right to live in the house had expired when I turned 18 and she had zero claim to the property, it was straightforward. She'd have 30 days from the notice date to vacate the premises. I decided to serve her the notice on the same day she wanted rent from me. My uncle thought it was petty, but didn't try to talk me out of it. He just made sure all the paperwork was correct and legally sound. We scheduled everything for the 1st. The week leading up to it was almost funny. She ramped up the landlord act hard. She started calling me when I was out with friends asking when I'd be home. Sent me texts about keeping my bathroom cleaner because tenants need to respect the property. Then she really crossed the line. I came home one afternoon to find her in my room going through my stuff. She claimed she was doing an inspection for damages since I was going to be a tenant soon. I'd left my laptop open on my desk, nothing sensitive on the screen, but she'd clearly been looking at it. When I called her out on it, she got defensive immediately, started going on about how landlords have the right to inspect their property, how she needed to make sure I wasn't damaging anything. I told her to get out of my room. She laughed but made a point of telling me I needed to get used to inspections. The day before the 1st, she texted me a reminder about the rent. It was this long message about responsibility and how she was teaching me valuable life lessons by making me pay my way. How this was preparing me for the real world, and I should be grateful she was only charging $800 instead of the $1,200 she could probably get from a real tenant. My uncle had texted me earlier that day confirming the eviction notice was ready. The next morning, she was waiting in the kitchen when I came downstairs. Had her coffee, was sitting at the table with this expectant look on her face. She asked if I had the rent ready. I told her I had something better and handed her the envelope. She opened it right there, and I watched her face go red. She started yelling. This was impossible. The house was hers. I was just a kid who didn't understand anything. I was trying to pull some scam. This paperwork wasn't real. She was going to call the police. I let her rant for a minute before I explained it simply. The house was mine. It had always been mine since my dad died. She'd been living here because the trust allowed her to stay until I turned 18. That deadline passed on my birthday. She had 30 days to get out. She demanded to know who helped me with this, who put these ideas in my head. I told her my uncle, who'd been the trustee of my dad's estate. She knew who he was. She tried to go through him to contest the will. Her face changed when she realized I knew about that too. The rest of that day was a blur of her on her phone. She called every attorney she could think of. I could hear her from upstairs. Her voice kept getting higher and more frantic with each call. Nobody was telling her what she wanted to hear. Finally, she stormed into my room without knocking, demanded to know what I'd done, how I'd manipulated the situation. I laid it out for her plainly. My dad left me everything. She got nothing because of the prenup. She had 30 days to leave. She started talking about how ungrateful I was, how she'd taken care of me after my dad died, how he'd be ashamed of me for treating her this way. I told her I'd read the emails, the ones where she tried to contest the will, the ones where she complained about wasting 4 years on my dad, the ones where she called him manipulative for protecting his son's inheritance. She didn't have a response to that. She gave me the silent treatment after that. Instead of her constant criticisms or demands, the house was quiet. I spent more time out with friends anyway. No point in being home when the tension was that thick. About a week after I'd served her with the eviction notice, I came home to find boxes by the front door. She'd packed up a bunch of my dad's stuff, his photos, his watch collection, some of his clothes. Just decided she was entitled to take whatever she wanted. I went through every single box and removed anything that belonged to my dad. She came downstairs while I was doing it and started screaming about how she deserved something to remember him by. I pulled out my phone and reminded her I had screenshots of those emails where she'd call him manipulative and said she'd wasted 4 years on him. She could remember him however she wanted, but she wasn't taking his stuff. The days crawled by after that. She finally started actually packing her own things, barely speaking to me at all. I made myself scarce most of the time, staying with friends or just driving around town. When we were both home, the atmosphere was suffocating. With about a week left in her 30 days, she tried to negotiate, asked if she could stay for just 1 more month to find somewhere to better. I said no. She offered to pay me rent, actually fair rent this time. Still no. She'd had 2 years to figure out her exit strategy. She'd spent that time trying to steal my inheritance instead. That was on her. On her last day, she had friends over helping her move. By evening, she was done. Didn't say goodbye, didn't leave any information about where she was going, just left her keys on the kitchen counter and walked out. I did a walkthrough of her old room and the rest of the house after she left. She'd actually left it pretty clean, probably worried about giving me ammunition for any kind of legal action. The next morning was the first day the house was completely mine. No trust restrictions, no stepmom, just me and the space my dad had wanted me to have. First thing I did was change all the locks. Didn't matter that she'd left her keys. I wanted completely new locks that she'd never had access to. Spent the rest of the day and the next few days just walking through the house room by room, deciding what to keep and what to change. Her bedroom would become something else, maybe a gym or an office. The dining room she'd always insisted stay formal and unused would become whatever I felt like making it. This place was finally going to feel like home instead of like I was constantly waiting for someone to tell me I didn't belong here. She spent 2 years making me feel unwelcome in my own home, then had the nerve to try and charge me rent. Update 1. It's been a couple weeks since she moved out and people have been asking what happened next. The shorter answer is, she's gone and I'm still here, which is exactly how it should be. The first few days after she left were honestly the most peaceful I'd felt in 2 years. Woke up the first morning and just walked through the house without that constant tension on my chest. No one watching me, no one making passive-aggressive comments, just silence. It was perfect. Some mail showed up for her a few days after she left, mostly junk, but a few things that looked official. I thought about forwarding it for maybe half a second, then decided against it. She was an adult who'd moved out. Updating her address was her responsibility. I just marked everything returned to sender and put it back in the mailbox. That's when I noticed she'd left a bunch of stuff in the garage. Christmas decorations, some old furniture she'd bought when she moved in, random boxes of who knows what. I called my uncle to ask if I needed to hold on to it or contact her about packing it up. He told me that legally, after the eviction date passed, anything left behind became my property. I could do whatever I wanted with it. Rented a dumpster that afternoon. Spent a few hours going through the garage and throwing out everything that was hers. The Christmas decorations went first. She'd always made a huge deal about decorating for the holidays, spending hours making everything look perfect, while complaining the entire time about how nobody appreciated her effort. Good riddance to all of it. Found some photo albums mixed in with her stuff. Flipped through one out of curiosity, and it was full of pictures from before my dad got sick. Her smiling in every single one, my dad looking tired in most of them. There were a few with me in the background, always off to the side or particularly cut out of a frame. Really drove home how she'd seen me as an accessory at best, an obstacle at worst. A few days later, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. Made the mistake of answering it. It was her, calling from someone else's phone, I guess. She wanted to come by and pick up a few things she forgot. I asked her what things specifically. She got all vague about it, said she'd know them when she saw them, that she just needed to walk through one more time. Yeah, that wasn't happening. I told her anything left behind after the move-out date was considered abandoned property, and I'd already disposed of it. She started crying, saying I was being cruel and heartless, that some of those things had sentimental value. I reminded her she'd had 30 days to get her stuff together, and she'd chosen to leave it behind. The video doorbell I'd installed turned out to be a smart investment. A couple of days after the phone call, one of her friends showed up at my door. I watched through the app on my phone as this woman knocked and waited. When I didn't answer, she knocked louder and called out that she knew I was home. I spoke to the doorbell speaker and told her I wasn't opening the door. She said she was there to collect some belongings for her friend. I told her there was nothing here that belonged to her friend anymore. She tried to argue, saying I was being unreasonable, that she'd known my father and he wouldn't have wanted this. That pissed me off. I told her if she didn't leave my property in the next 60 seconds, I was calling the cops for trespassing. The doorbell stayed, and I'm glad it did, because over the next week, she tried to send 2 more people to the house. Different friends, same story. They'd knock, I'd tell them through the speaker to leave. They'd try to guilt trip me. I'd threaten to call the police. They'd leave. Her sister, apparently, though I'd never known she had one. Long message about what a terrible person I was, how I was treating her sister horribly, how family doesn't do this to family, how I should be ashamed of myself. Got another message around this time from someone claiming to be a family counselor who'd heard about my situation and wanted to offer mediation services. Checked the profile, and it was a brand new account with no other activity. Definitely her using a fake account or getting someone to message me. The deep cleaning I'd hired got finished, and I started really making the place mine. Donated most of the furniture she'd picked out. It was all this modern minimalist stuff that I'd never fit in the house anyway. My dad had liked vintage, comfortable furniture. Spent some time finding pieces that actually matched what he would have wanted. Repainted her old bedroom. She'd had it this awful shade of purple that made the whole room feel dark. Went with a neutral color instead, something that would work for whatever I decided to use the room for. Watching that purple get covered up was more satisfying than it probably should have been. My uncle checked in regularly during all this, asked how I was holding up, if she was still trying to make contact, if I needed anything. I appreciated it, but I was fine. Better than fine, actually. Started having friends over for the first time in forever. When she lived here, I'd always avoided bringing people to the house because she made it uncomfortable, always hovering, making comments, finding reasons to interrupt. Now I could actually use my own space without walking on eggshells. I love that she thought charging rent was her power move. Meanwhile, you had the house, the money, the legal backup, and the moral high ground all along. Every frantic phone call, every friend she ever sent over, every fake family counselor attempt, priceless. She literally spent 4 years scheming for scraps and ended up with nothing. Absolutely nothing. The satisfaction in repainting her awful purple walls, reclaiming rooms, installing new locks, hosting friends without her hovering, absolute chef's kiss. Do you have a similar story? Share it with us in the comments below. And thank you for joining us today in the rLounge. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video. See you next time. And please put your chair back where you found it.